Hello and welcome. I'm Eric Miskell with EMSNOW, and welcome to this edition of EMSNOW Up Close. Today, it's my pleasure to speak again with Mark Rinehart, the founder and managing director of Whitehorse Laboratories in Shenzhen, China. Mark, welcome. Good to see you.
Good morning, Eric. Good to see you as well. It's particularly everything going. Good to see you in person, so to speak. It's about as close as we can get recently.
Yeah, exactly. Listen, before we jump in, I got various questions to ask you. Give a quick overview of Whitehorse Labs for our audience.
Sure. I started Whitehorse in 2004 specifically to combat the flood. It was a flood of counterfeit electronics into the supply chain. So I set up the company here, try to get as close to the source as possible. Since then, we've expanded beyond just counterfeit detection to failure analysis and life cycle and reliability testing, from components to PCBA, and finished assemblies. But I still primarily, our base is primarily here in Southeast Asia, Shenzhen and Hong Kong specifically. But like in the last couple of years, even though we've been doing other things, we've really been entirely focused on the component shortage market, which has just got everybody in a tailspin.
No, amen to that. So we'll get into your operations in a minute, but I always like to start with you because you're kind of our man on the ground over there in some ways. You see, you got that going on. Chinese New Year, it ended. How is it ramping up after Chinese New Year? How's the industry coming out of it?
Yeah, Chinese New Year ended, actually it was about 2 weeks ago, was the final celebration that ended with the Lantern Festival. Now, usually it's kind of it's a 3-day holiday that kind of expands into closer to a 3-week holiday. Just pretty much everything closes, the entire country closes for a week. And then the week before and the week after, there's a lot of people leaving earlier, coming back later to visit family. This year really wasn't any different. Most of our team were able to travel to visit their family. There wasn't a whole lot of restrictions for travel on COVID. Had to be careful to avoid some of the high risk areas. But it was pretty much a typical pattern this year for Chinese New Year, and the same as everything. Everybody always forgets that China actually closes for a week, and the Friday before, it's like, oh gosh, can we get this done? It's like everybody's gone. But it came back to life pretty quickly this year. There were a couple restricted areas. I know Suzhou and then Shanghai and here in Shenzhen faced some COVID outbreaks during CNY, but kind of as people came back to the cities is when it kind of occurred. So maybe a little bit slower start this year, coming out of Chinese New Year, just some of the travel restrictions coming back were in place. But overall, I'd say things have picked back up. They were picking back up, and then areas in China are going through new waves of COVID outbreaks. So that's limiting kind of ramp ups.
Yeah, tell us about that. I wanted to hear about that too. You said that when we spoke a week or so ago in preparation for this interview, give a quick update as to what's happening over there and the lockdowns. And you had mentioned something about having to have everything sanitized too. So
yeah, Hong Kong's really in a bad state. The new numbers in Hong Kong are 35,000 plus on a daily basis. And that's frightening for a city of that population. And I don't know if you know much about Hong Kong, but there's a lot of families that have like 3 generations in the same family, and it's the elderly obviously that are at risk. And if it gets into your house, it's getting to your folks.
Oh, yeah. The density there is incredible, right? So.
Yeah. So that's been scary. Somehow it's managed to spill over, it seems, into some of the major populated areas here. So I mean, Shenzhen, we're really just across the border. So I mean, there's still some traffic back and forth. Suzhou and Shanghai have had some issues. Suzhou first, and then Shanghai. But with the borders by and large being closed, there is some traffic, but not a lot back and forth across the border. There's a lot of question about where it was coming from. So as a precaution, they've been sanitizing every package that comes into the country. In the case it was traveling on the packages, it was quite cold here during Chinese New Year and afterwards. And I suppose it can survive a little bit on the outside and exposed in the colder when the UV is not on it as much. But literally every courier package and even forwarders have been facing the issue of everything coming in has to be sanitized. Of course, there's no capacity to do that. So standard imports, which are 1 to 2 days, have been taking 2 weeks to be able to get through the sanitation process and then get redistributed. You can imagine.
Yeah, what do you mean sanitize in that respect? The boxes themselves, they're not opening up whatever's in there, right? So
correct. I think they're like misting or fogging the outside of the boxes, or I haven't seen the apparatus that they're using. It was really sunny last week. I wish they just put them outside, got them out in the sunlight, and that would have knocked it off. But I can imagine the warehouses or the logistics hubs are absolutely overflowing with packages that are piling up. We even had issues people couldn't pick up in Hong Kong because they had nowhere in Shenzhen to put it while they were clearing it through. That's the spillover effect of the outbreak and the containment measures have really had a pretty dramatic ripple effect into logistics. Couriers aren't picking up in certain areas. They're not sending their drivers to certain areas to deliver, either to not put the driver at risk or to put the facility at risk that's having it. And we've talked to everybody up and down the logistics supply chain, and it's like, we don't know what to do. This in terms of like, how do you stop moving that many packages, and just the bottleneck that's occurring from that has been difficult, I think, to manage in terms of the sheer volume.
Okay.
Yeah, it's going to take a while to sort that out, I think.
Okay. So right after Chinese New Year, it starts ramping up. This kind of happens at the same time. So. Yep,
it was a ramp up, and we didn't ramp down. People were really having you can imagine it's difficult to get your materials in. It's been, some people have had difficulties getting their full teams back in place. So I think the takeoff, I mean, it was on the runway, and then it just kind of got slowed down. But we're still seeing a lot of truck activity. So I don't know, hopefully it'll clear out pretty soon. The main concern obviously is that here in Shenzhen, it's been contained very well. It's effective, it's not just lockdowns, but kind of restrictions. If you test positive, then stay at home. And if you're around somebody that has, also stay at home until we make sure that everybody else is all right. So it sounds drastic, but it works.
Yeah. No, I mean, and they've been through a few cycles of this too, right? So that's, well, so let's talk about your operations then. Obviously, that's what we're here to talk about, is to get a sense of that. So how have your operations expanded in the last year? COVID, we've been talking, you've been on a few shows with us, lending your insights, but your business continues to kind of ramp, right?
Yeah, the shortage market overall, and there's been, you're running out of factors that are contributing to the shortage market. There's just so many contributing factors, and COVID's been one of them, but there's been so many factors contributing that we've just maintained busy. Us being busy isn't really good for the industry. It means the industry is in spite, and they're having to go to alternate channels and out of desperation looking for material to go to production. I remember way back one of our first audits when we were really small, because the question was like scalability. I think we've learned our ability to scale in the past year and a half, using new technologies, new methodologies to be able to ramp up with the same quality level. We expanded our facility, our footprint here in Shenzhen into the free trade zone, so we could manage product coming into the country much easier than we could from our Shenzhen facility, because we couldn't get our engineering team to Hong Kong in order to do the setups. So we managed it by putting another facility here in Shenzhen. But then with the logistics issues, we figured out how quickly we could actually ramp up our capabilities in Hong Kong. So with the logistics issues, it's harder to get stuff in, including into the free trade zone. So we're just adding those capabilities into Hong Kong, and we've been very successful at doing so very quickly. So I think we've learned a lot about scalability, mobility, and flexibility, I think. I mean,
Yeah.
the waves of product that's been coming through. It's earlier in the year was automotive and MCUs, and then it shifted to power management devices. And we went from like 2 workstations to 6 to 8 different workstations testing those types of devices with the same quality factors. So yeah, I think we've learned a lot in the last 2 years. We've been busy, but we've been steady and consistent, and people are protected still. We're not. The stuff isn't getting through, even though the volumes they're pushing it. It's still not getting through. We learned a lot.
Now, has the profile of who your customers are changed at all? Is it? I mean, it's manufacturers, EMS and OEM primarily, or?
We've seen a very healthy trend, and we've seen this trend going on for the last several years, pre-pandemic, but we've seen the OEMs get much more involved in this process than in previous years. There's always been kind of a filter down effect that the OEM has a policy, and then it kind of relies on the suppliers to enact it. But we've seen the OEMs get much more involved in driving that program. So that's been a very healthy trend, we think, particularly in automotive. We're seeing automotive manufacturers getting more directly involved in making sure that their supply chains are intact and from the source of supply. So definitely some healthy trends in that regard. We've seen a lot of the independent distributors through the brokers adding to their own capabilities, being able to do more internally, which is good. I mean, the more quality control, the better, regardless of where it's being done. So I think there's been a lot of eyes opening about how bad the counterfeit situation can get if it's unprotected. And at this scale, there's a lot of people adding capabilities to be able to protect themselves, whether it's through better management of their supply chain or internal capabilities. But it's a healthy trend. The only way to, kind of like the COVID thing, the only way to get rid of it is to stomp it out or deal with it. And I don't think this is one that you would just kind of want to let go.
Yeah. So you said a lot there. Let's unpack some of that. Let's start with the general trends. You mentioned kind of. So what are you seeing in terms of recycled and counterfeit parts? Is that trending up?
That's definitely trending up. And it started pretty quickly. I don't think even last year I was saying, like, this is kind of the market where it's like the chum is in the water and the sharks are circling. We are seeing so much bad stuff. It's pretty incredible. Everything from recycled, like there's good parts about the circular economy, but it needs to be transparent about when you're getting that stuff that's coming back around full circle. So we're seeing lots of refurb secondhand product. We're seeing a lot of counterfeit product. We have seen more dummy parts in the last 12 months than we had ever seen before. Dummy parts are just plastic and pins. There's no wafer inside of them. So how do you make a lot of chips when there's a chip shortage? Well, just don't put the chip inside. And we've seen so many of those, and it's pretty incredible. But yeah, it's gotten pretty bad, and it's getting worse. I think the odd part is people aren't realizing that chip production is actually up. I think the statistics are it's up 20-30%. So the chip manufacturers are ramping up. It's just that the demand for chips is still outpacing the ability to manufacture them. It's not like we got in this boat because chip manufacturers had some issues. Even though they've got those issues mostly resolved or in production, this is still too far to go to catch up completely.
Okay. Excuse me.
Sure.
You also referenced there and it's an issue that we're hearing a lot about, is the issue of the authorized channels. And you see changing in sourcing behavior kind of from traditional authorized channels to more of the brokers.
Yep.
It seems to be you're seeing that. What are the implications of
that? The broker channels are, you don't have traceability. When you get them from an authorized distributor, you have traceability that it came directly from the manufacturer. When it comes from the independent channels, you lose that traceability. In some cases, that traceability is completely removed. So that's the biggest factor, and that just throws everything into question. You can't take anything at face value that it is what it says it is. So it needs to be verified. whether it's for like a basic process for visual inspection, but even still, they're getting too good at it. That product that passes visually can be defective or counterfeit on the inside. So the external only processes are insufficient. They're sufficient to find some bad issues, but they're not sufficient to say everything's good. But on the independent, the authorized distribution, again, the authorized distributors can't get enough. The manufacturers can't keep up. So that's the source for the authorized distributors. And when manufacturers, OEMs, are looking for product and it's not at authorized distribution, they have to go to alternate channels, or they're forced to go to alternate channels and hope they can find it there. Again, the question is it really, even if we've heard everything from wire fraud, people buying parts that don't even exist, and never receiving anything through like what we're trying to defeat, which is people buying product that isn't actually what they think it is.
Right. And yeah, as you say that, I mean, the implication is to have a good relationship, right? I mean, speak to that. I mean, that seems to be at the core of this, regardless of who you're working with, right?
Yeah, and I think that's very much a regional thing. Authorized distributors, like they only have their offices in regional areas. They don't allow sales outside of your region. So you can't buy from an authorized distributor in the US. If you're based in Hong Kong, you have to buy from the Hong Kong office, but the Hong Kong office can't get it from there either. So you're kind of left with the relationships. All right, well, who is actually able to get the product where it physically is located to be able to move it to where it's needed to be? And that's relationships. As advanced as the supply chains are, visibility on where the inventory is actually located seems pretty limited in terms of the big picture view. And I suppose that's a bit of a concern in terms of if the component manufacturers don't know where their product's going, how do they know how much is already in the supply chain between them and the OEM as they continue to push product out? I suspect there's going to be a glut at some point where they're going to keep producing because OEMs say they don't have enough, but there's a huge pile that's somewhere in between their distribution channel and the OEM that hasn't found its way to the OEM yet. And all of a sudden they're going to go from, we don't have enough to, yeah, we're good for the next 6 months. But yeah, I still think those are, at the end of the day, those are relationships for like finding where the inventory is actually located and who has access to get it.
Yeah, and I heard that from some EMS who say, you know, if you find the parts, buy them immediately. Grab what you got from whatever channels, right?
Yep.
Speed is of the essence. And now, in those situations, your customers, if they're buying, say, from an independent or from a broker, part of the condition that it has to be tested by you in order to go into their system.
To a degree, yes. Some are saying, most are designating that have to be tested. Some are designating who can do the testing to make sure that that they know that the work is being done properly and the people doing the work are qualified to do that. So at least and again, this is a healthy thing. If they're not designating who, they're at least designating what needs to be done. Some of them are saying they actually need the copy of the report themselves for their own engineers to have a look at it before they would accept it. So those are all very healthy trends, I think.
Okay. But I would think in times if people feel desperate that they may just forego that and say, get me the parts, right? So.
Yeah, that's the scary part. And when we're hearing, and you know, our sales team here is like, well, okay, we'll skip the last process and ship because it's urgent. It's like, how about we at least keep some of them to finish the testing while the balance is on the way. It sounds like the answer you want to hear today, but if there's a problem, once it's in production, it's too late. So I really suggest you wait a couple days to let us finish. Yeah, and particularly now when there's so much stuff, defective product moving around, skipping steps is not the way to go. I understand the urgency, but yeah, the quality of your product at the end of the day outweighs the need to be in production tomorrow.
The other piece you mentioned before was that about the OEMs and that you see them more increasingly involved. Is that on the purchasing process as well and the negotiations, or?
That part we don't see. We don't see the negotiations between the OEM buyers and their suppliers. So I would assume so, but I don't know. We don't actually have visibility on that part. We stay out of that side. That's
Yeah.
That's not our area.
But you said that, but when you think of the profile of your customers, you see more OEM involvement with what you're doing.
Yep. Yeah, definitely. The standard that's pretty well utilized now is the AS6081. That gives a good template for it. This is what you should do. You should do this process and that sample plan. We're seeing the OEMs starting to adopt that and then maybe modifying it to their own risk profile. So we want to do more of this and less of that, or add this other process. But we definitely are seeing that there's, rather than them saying, yeah, we need them tested, to this is what we need to have you tested. And the OEMs are even designating which we need it tested at this temperature profile, and we need that specific parameter tested, which that's very, very healthy. Great, you guys know exactly what you need, so that really helps us target what we're looking for. And we've seen cases where what product looks authentic on the outside is having like a 60% failure rate in electrical testing. So doing external only is not enough. And when the OEMs are saying you need to do the electrical test, we're like, okay, good, you get it. You know what's going on here, and there's stuff that's floating around here that isn't detectable unless you use electrical test.
Okay. The other issue I wanted to check with you on is the impact that the regionalization, reshoring, whatever you want to call it, is having on manufacturing and the component supply base. What are you seeing there?
On the manufacturing side, we're shipping to, we maintain chain of custody. So when we test, we want to get all of it from the supplier and ship it to the end user. So we know that the product that's being shipped is what we had tested, and that the samples are representing the entire lot. So we kind of maintain control of that shipping process. We're shipping to a lot more places than we ever had before, in terms of the geographic distribution. Areas in Europe, a lot more going to Mexico, a lot more going back to the United States, and Central and Western Europe, South America, even the Middle East and Africa, we're seeing a lot more. So there's definitely been a regional, it looks to us like there's regionalization because our geographic spread of where we're shipping is much larger. In terms of the component manufacturing, like we're reading about all the chip fabs that are opening up all over the place, but the assembly is still being done here. So, okay, the ingots and the wafers are being regionalized, but the final production is still in the same place.
Yeah.
So
you mean all the packaging and what, right? So
yeah, the final assembly, packaging, and testing is still being done in the same centers. I haven't seen much of a trend to move that.
right.
So if you can't make them, it doesn't really matter where the wafers are coming from. You're protecting your IP better, I guess, by having your the ingots and the wafers manufactured in more regional centers. So that's been regionalized, and we saw some problems with that last year when some power outages earlier in the year in Texas shut some wafer fabs down cold. But again, if you're still building them in the same place, the effects of regionalization are pretty limited until they start redistributing the whole thing. That's on the chip manufacturing side. We've heard a lot about India ramping up, or at least investing heavily to get more involved in that process. Vietnam, I think, has continued that trend. I mean, their trend, they got involved early on and then it kind of scaled back, but it seems to be ramping up again. We heard a lot more about Malaysia and Thailand getting more involved in the manufacturing process, where a lot had been moved to China. We're seeing some of that moving, not necessarily moving out, it's just regionalizing. So we've seen some flight of that, and certainly at the electronics assembly side, we're seeing a much bigger distribution of manufacturing locations from the PCBA, the assembly side.
Yeah, no, that's good insight. I appreciate that. And I know it was an issue when we spoke a week ago, but I will ask the question. The calamity that's going on in the Ukraine, obviously, that has no impact on your business?
Not yet. I think, as we discussed, I hadn't thought about it that deeply, but I looked into it a little bit. I think the raw material sources, that may be disrupting today, but we won't see the effects of that for some time, as that constraint is then going to flow through the pipeline, and it'll the loss is there in terms of not being able to get enough of the raw materials to do the assembly. That probably won't be felt for a while. So I would suspect that while we're not seeing much today, it's certainly thrown the logistics scenario into even more of a mess. So logistically, I think there's been some challenges that have arisen from that. But I think the deeper supply chain issues are going to be seen in like a couple months or more, when like the raw materials that are in the pipeline are used up and there's nothing new coming from those sources.
Right. Okay. Yeah, and I hear what you mean on the logistics when you can't fly over certain geographies anymore, right? That's that causes a problem. So
yeah, and people are redirecting around it. I think in terms of physically what we're seeing, that we haven't seen much of an impact yet, but the uncertainty and the anxiety and the fear over what could and what's already going on and how further this could escalate, there's a lot of what in the world's going to happen next. Sort of uncertainty and scaling back, delaying some decisions and ideas until we see what the impact of those. Hopefully everybody comes to their senses and just stops this nonsense, but that's not up for us to decide, unfortunately.
Yeah, we don't get a vote on that one, do we? So
No, I don't think anybody actually got a vote on that.
no, yeah. Well, one person evidently.
Yeah, one guy had a vote.
One guy had a vote, and that never ends well. Mark, listen, I always appreciate getting caught up with you, and hopefully we can do some more later this year. I think there's, your business seems to be doing well. I think you have some things in the pipeline that we'd like to revisit with you later in the year.
Okay. Yeah, we certainly have, and it's been a very busy and dynamic year. I think we've done a lot of. At the end of the year, when it's all said and done, we look back at what we were able to get done. We're like, wow, okay. It seemed kind of chaotic, but we really got a lot done. So yeah, that would be fun to take a look at that kind of structurally.
Yeah, no. Well, good. Well, thank you for your time and your insights today. I'm sure the audience appreciates it. For those of you watching, White Horse Labs is the company. Mark Rinehart is the man. If you need to try to get him, you can find him very easily on LinkedIn, which is what I usually point people to. Certainly, White Horse Labs, the website is a very good source as well. So,
all right,
Mark, thank you, sir. We'll do a catch up later in the year, I hope.
It sounds good. Look forward. Always a pleasure speaking with you, Eric. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, take care.
Bye-bye.